Indian High Commissioner to Canada Sanjay Kumar Varma, who has now been recalled by New Delhi, has accused Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of wrecking bilateral ties with India. Canada designated the High Commissioner and 5 other Indian diplomats as persons of interest in the killing of Sikh separatist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar in British Columbia last year. India's response to these allegations was to withdraw the diplomats. It was then followed by Canadian government's move to formally expel them. Adding now, the Indian High Commissioner to Canada said that Trudeau's decision to blame India for Nijjar's killing, it was based on intelligence information rather than concrete evidence. My name is Hem Kaur Saroy and I'm being joined by Mr. Brahmachalani, Professor of Strategic Studies at the Centre for Policy Research, to understand where the bilateral relationship between the two stands at the moment as there are spirals. Mr. Brahmachalani, thank you so much for joining us on WION.
Thank you.
Now, sir, to begin with, I'm sure you're aware of the comments made by the Indian High Commissioner to Canada. He's blamed Trudeau for wrecking the ties between the two and, in fact, has even called out Western hypocrisy in his comments. What's your take on this?
Let's look at the broader picture first. The Khalistan movement is virtually dead in India. But it appears that some security agencies in the Anglosphere countries, especially Canada, US and the UK, are seeking to revive Khalistan militancy in India. Because as the High Commissioner, Sanjay Varma, said, that Khalistan extremists and terrorists are, quote unquote, deep assets of Canadian intelligence. Some people, for example, believe that Panun, who's based in New York and who's been designated by India as a terrorist, is a CIA asset. The question is, when these individuals based in Canada or the US make terrorist threats against India, Panun, for example, has again, he released a video a year ago, last November, saying that his goal was to balkanize India, and he warned people from flying Air India. Today, he's again released a message asking people not to fly Air India between November 1st and November 19th. And this is from US soil he's making these threats. And yet there's no action against such individuals, which raises the question as to whether these individuals, these militants, are assets of certain security agencies that are using them to leverage ties with India and potentially to revive Khalistan militancy in India.
Right, so in fact, I was just going to come to this, just to expand on this a little. Now, the High Commissioner said that Khalistani extremists are being encouraged, assets of the Canadian intelligence, as you mentioned as well. Perhaps the strongest comment was where he questioned G7 countries as well, saying that some have conducted extrajudicial murders, adding that as the largest democracy in the world, we are committed to not do judicial killings in any other territory. What's your take on that, sir?
It's a known fact that the United States is the big daddy of extraterritorial assassinations. It carries out extraterritorial assassinations on a regular basis. This year alone, there have been several extrajudicial killings on foreign soil by the United States. And here is the irony of ironies. Every time the US has done an extraterritorial assassination, Trudeau has applauded that killing on social media. So look at the hypocrisy. He's accusing India of an extrajudicial killing that India denies. It denies any kind of involvement in that killing of Nijjar, who was being quoted by Canadian intelligence agency CSIS, according to Canadian press. When Nijjar was murdered, the Vancouver Sun, for example, reported, quoting Nijjar's son, that intelligence officers of CSIS regularly, almost on a weekly basis, met with Nijjar. Now, what does that tell us? It tells us that Nijjar was most likely an intelligence asset who was being cultivated for purposes that only Canadian government can explain. Why was it being cultivated by CSIS, which is the main intelligence agency of Canada? Why were intelligence officers meeting with him almost on a weekly basis? Now, these are questions that Canadian government has not answered.
Right, sir. Absolutely. As the High Commissioner mentioned as well, there's not been a shred of evidence. Now, he also did mention that non-political bilateral ties will not be impacted. That being said, as relations between the two sours and as this row spirals, do you think ties can be mended, especially at a time when it appears that Canada is harboring separatists?
Repairing the ties will be a difficult and long process because Trudeau is going to be out of office sooner or later. He's deeply unpopular in Canada. Elections are coming in Canada, and in next year they will be held latest by October. They might be held earlier, but Trudeau is facing a revolt within his ruling Liberal Party to resign because the Liberal Party knows that if he continues to be the Prime Minister, the party is going to suffer a major defeat in the forthcoming elections. So whether he stays on for another 11 months or resigns earlier, the fact is that whatever problems he has created in the India-Canada relationship, those problems will be bequeathed to the next government in Ottawa. For example, Canada has now become the global hub of Sikh militants who are advocating the creation of quote-unquote Khalistan. Now that problem will remain even when Trudeau resigns office, which means that that shadow of Khalistan militancy operating, of using Canada as an operating base, that shadow will continue to linger over Indo-Canadian relations, which will make it very difficult for both governments, the new government in Ottawa, post-Trudeau, and the government in New Delhi, to repair that bilateral relationship. So I think we should not be under the illusion that the removal of Trudeau will magically help restore the India-Canada relationship. That relationship has been damaged largely because of the fact that Khalistan militants are using British Columbia and some suburbs of Toronto, like Brampton, as operating bases for their terrorist activity against India. It's not simply the demand for the creation of a separate Sikh homeland. It is the fact that they are making terrorist threats against India, and they have a history of actually carrying out those threats. For example, the Air India twin bombings of 1985, two separate Canadian inquiries found that Canada-based Khalistan terrorists were responsible for carrying out those twin Air India bombings that killed 331 people. So today, in a way, history is repeating itself. Just the way Canada had become a hub of Khalistan militants in the first half of the 1980s, today Canada has become the international epicenter of the Khalistan movement. And as I said, it's not the issue of asking for a separate Sikh homeland. That by itself is not unconstitutional or illegal or criminal, right? What is criminal and illegal is for Canada to tolerate these Khalistanis openly glorifying terrorism, glorifying Indira Gandhi's assassination, calling for the killing of the incumbent Prime Minister in India, Narendra Modi, and threatening to carry out acts of terror against New Delhi Airport, against Air India, and against targets in India. All that has been happening under the tolerant watch of the governments in Ottawa and Washington. That is unacceptable.
Right. Well, Mr. Chelani, thank you so much for joining us on WION World as One with your insights on this.
Thank you.
For latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.